we go. Let's take it back to the beginning. If it wasn't for my transformation, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. But I have to take you back to the beginning first so you can see how it all started. So I was born into a big family. My father had 12 sisters and brothers. On my mother's side, she had 10 sisters and brothers. Dealing with generational curses and things like that, doesn't matter who you spend time with more. You know, those curses from both my mother's side and my father's side came out. We were raised to attend church on Sundays, you know, Sunday nights if there was a Sunday night service, Tuesday nights if they were doing Bible study, and then Friday night, that was joy and deliverance service, sometimes youth night. We went 3 times a week. It was a habit for us. On Mondays, we had family prayer. No matter where we were in the house, my father would start singing, "Don't forget the family prayer." And we could be upstairs, we could be doing our homework, anything. We had to come downstairs. Started hearing that song, "Don't forget the family prayer. Jesus gonna meet you there." And we would know to start running downstairs. And this was instilled in me from when I was like 4 years old. During this time also, God started using me to prophesy. And again, I was like 5 years old, and at the time we had a small car that my father was using to transport us around and stuff like that, and it was just too small, you know. So God told me to tell my parents that God is gonna bless us with a yellow van. Down the street from my house, or the apartment that we were in, there was McDonald's on one side and then a Ford dealership on the other side. We were going past the Ford dealership one day. This was after I prophesied to them, and I saw the yellow van. I immediately knew. I said to my parents, "That's it. That's the van that God said he's going to bless us with." I'll never forget, that was like in the middle of the year. You know, that year we got the van, and that was my first prophecy. And I believe that was my last prophecy also. We used to have a house that was passed down from generation to generation, and it was in Mount Vernon. It was called the Big House, and we all used to go over there. I remember my cousins, we used to meet over there after school. We used to stop at the corner store where the Big House used to be and pick up some Jolly Ranchers and, you know, some gum and stuff like that. And my cousin at the time was the only one that had a Nintendo, and we used to meet over there to try to, I would say, beat the levels on the Nintendo. My parents, they provided as much as they could, but my cousin had all of the gadgets. He had all of the games because he was an only child. I was around 9 years old at the time, and that's when everything started going downhill. One of my other cousins, older cousins, was also at the house. During that time, I was being molested by my older cousin. So I would go over there thinking I was going to escape, but I was being imprisoned by being molested. And this went on for about 5 years. And I did not tell my parents, did not tell anyone what was going on. But when I look back on it now, a lot of things shifted for me back then. There were different doors that opened. I was angry, but holding it in. I was bitter. I had rage. And this was all from that door of molestation being open Even though I was the victim, that door was open. And Satan was so cunning to even, gain entry, even at the young age that I was. And that started the cycle of just me acting out, just doing different things. And I didn't know why I was doing it. And that was because that door was opened. But I never told anyone. Still was going to church. I was a musician for the church, still playing the drums, still just masking everything. I remember a lot of times on the drums, I used to play so hard, and I was able to mask my pain through playing the drums. A lot of people took that for the anointing of God, but in all actuality, I was far from God. My grades started slipping in school, going through high school, barely making it. There were so many different subjects that I was failing at. I remember I had to do summer school, and my parents didn't know what was going on. So barely got through high school, almost didn't graduate. So after I graduated high school, and we lost the house that we were in Cortland, so we had to move back to New York. We moved back to New York, and we moved to a house in New Rochelle. And at the time, it was one of my uncle's properties that he had, and we moved in there. And it was on Remington Place in New Rochelle, New York. And at that house, there were other doors that opened in my life. My cousin, one of my other cousins, gave us a scrambler box. Now, if anybody knows anything about a scrambler, you can get every channel on the scrambler on cable. Once we got that, I remember flipping through the channels one night, and I stopped on a channel, and there were naked women on there, and that piqued my interest, So that was that door that opened up for pornography. And I remember I used to sneak down there at night just to flip the channels, just to satisfy. Satan knows how to come at you. He knows how to entice you. There were, again, a lot of doors that were opened up just from one thing happening. So I remember one night down watching stuff I wasn't supposed to be watching. I was like 16 years old. I was starting to mature, but that was another vice that the enemy was using. So he sort of kept me from being molested, but then he put something else out in front of me by way of pornography. So that was another spirit that entered in from that. So this one particular night, I'm down watching pornography. Did not know I was so into the TV and so into the show that was on. Did not hear my father coming into the living room where I was. And he caught me watching pornography. I'll never forget that night. And he was like, "What are you doing?" He said, "Go upstairs and get in the bed. And you're not supposed to be watching that." That was it. But it was already in my spirit. The hook Satan planted was already there. So that was another thing that I struggled with, during my teenage years, was pornography. I'm dealing with all of this, not even 18 yet, dealing with pornography, dealing with anger, dealing with rage, dealing with being bitter as a person from everything that I've been through. All of these spirits I'm dealing with at such a young age before I'm turning 18. But when I look back on it now, there were root causes. There were doors that specifically opened up for things that I dealt with throughout my adult life. I just always found myself just running from job to job. And it was the same with girls. I was always looking for love, was never satisfied. And this Reason why I wasn't satisfied, because I was looking in the wrong places. Being in church, playing the drums for church, still was not developing my own relationship with God, but using all of these things and spirits that have entered to self-medicate. So when I turned 18, that's when I met my wife. And my cousin, he was dating my wife's sister at the time. And he said, oh, I have this girl that you might, be interested in. She's, my girlfriend's sister. I don't even know if he said my girlfriend, because at the time, me and, my cousins, we had issues with putting a label on people. And just because of everything that we have been through, everything that we've gone through, it was so hard for us to commit. And that was because of what we were dealing with, what we were going through, and we couldn't commit to just one person. So we never called, the people that we were with girlfriends. So during this one time, this is the first time that I met, my future wife, and went over to the house. He said, why don't you come over with me and we'll play cards and stuff. She'll be there. So I said, okay. So we get over there, and I never forget, I saw her. She had on these tight leather pants, and it was like this fur top. She was dressed up, putting on her fur coat, and she was going to go to the club. My cousin's girlfriend at the time, my future wife's sister, she was already going to my family's church, but my future wife wasn't. She wasn't in church. She didn't want to have nothing to do with church. She said, I'm not going to a church where all they do is just take your money. So she was out there. She was really out there. And with me, I was the church boy, being raised in church and stuff, but people saw the outward, didn't know what I was struggling with inside. So she was going to the club and everything, and I said, why don't you stick around? I said, we're about to play cards. She said, nope, I'm going to get my dance on, and not so many certain words. She didn't want to have nothing to do with me. She was into Roughnecks, and she told me that. She was real vocal at the time. She left that night, and I was a third wheel, playing with my cousin and, his girl. But it was fun. I was able to see where my future wife lived. She was, I think, 19 at the time. So she was a year older than me. And I liked her. It was just something about her. Deep down, I knew, just from how my family was, that they weren't going to approve of her. Just because of she wasn't in the church, didn't want to have nothing to do with the church. I just knew deep down that we were going to be together.
A little while later, she started attending my family's church and was wholeheartedly seeking God, whereby within 2 months of being a member, she was baptized with the Holy Spirit in her living room with no one else around. She was on fire for God.
She used to come over to the house that we were staying at in New Rochelle to see me. And back then, she had to grow on my parents. That was the only person or people I was really concerned with. For her impressing, I wanted her to make a good impression. And I remember one time she came over, and for some reason, I'll never forget this, but before she left, she anointed my head. And I never knew what she was doing, but she anointed my head. And she told me many years later what she did. And she prayed over me right there and said, God, he's going to be my husband. And that was when I was, I believe, 19 years old. She anointed my head. There were so many things that happened Between that time, people in my family did not like her. I'm just being transparent. Just because of she wasn't born into the church. My family had already who I was going to marry because of that girl. She was in the church. She came from a background of being in church and stuff like that, and that's who they wanted for me. And I wasn't going for it. I already knew this was the person that I was going to marry. So being a preacher's kid, some of my aunts even came up to me and used God, and said, oh, when they found out that I wanted to marry her, God said she's not the right one for you. It's like, oh, thank you. But God didn't tell me that. So I'm moving ahead. And that's what I did.
We eventually went ahead and got married in October of 2000.
Hello, my name is Shauna Moorhead, and I'm Greg's wife.
After we got married, I left my family's church because I knew that if I would stay there, I would be divorced, truthfully. And that's what I told my wife, the exact words. I said, we have to leave Mount Vernon because if I stay here, we're not going to last because of everything that was going on with my family and them not wanting me to be with my wife. So that's what we did. Moved to Connecticut and been in Connecticut ever since. And through that time, once we left the ministry, that was hard. That was hard for me to do just because that was still my family. Left the ministry, and probably about 6 months to a year later, we found a different ministry through my cousin, and we started going there. And I was really able to see God out of the box working. I was just amazed at the apostle there and how
he flowed in the prophetic.
Yes, there were issues. Yes, there were things that were going on. But when he got up to speak, God really used him. And that's what intrigued me. And that's when I was able to see, okay, God really working. And this is how it's supposed to be. And we stayed there for about a year or two, and we left that ministry. And for about, I would say, 5 or 6 years, we didn't go to a ministry. It felt like we were in the wilderness. Just because growing up, we were always taught to find yourself in a ministry. Doesn't matter what's going on, doesn't matter, but for some reason, the building, you had to be in a building. But being in a building, I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't finding what I thought I needed. And I'm going to admit this and be transparent. During that time, after we got married, our roles reversed. So instead of me being the head of the house, my wife took on that role.
Our roles were reversed. I took on the major burden of making sure that the kids had a godly foundation and upbringing. I also took on the financial responsibilities in our household.
We didn't have to say it. It was just actions. Just because I wasn't able to provide. There were so many issues that I brought into the marriage and didn't know how to deal with it, because growing up, I always masked everything. We weren't taught to cover up things, but that's what we did. Because my family dealt with everything internally, I never saw processes or ways to deal with situations. I didn't know how to deal with situations because I never saw that in my family, because we were so big and because of a name that they were trying to uphold and protect. They dealt with everything inside. It was never a point where we had to deal with anything head on. My family dealt with everything. That contributed to my downfall and to me going downhill, not knowing how to love my wife, not knowing how to be the head of my home. Yes, I saw that, my father was the head. My father was the male in the house, but I didn't know how to love my wife. I didn't know how to be that provider. Again, I saw my father working. I saw my father doing and being the man, but I was never taught that. And was never taught that because of all of the things that I was struggling with and dealing with. And the enemy had a way of just compacting everything, pushing everything down, just pushing everything down and not dealing with stuff. That's how I got through life, not dealing with things. So when it came time for me to try to step up as a man in my home, I couldn't do that because I didn't know how to do that. I was dealing with so many things internally, didn't know how to step up and be a man. So for years, I would say 20 years, our roles were reversed. There was one thing that happened from me not dealing with stuff, and this was the major thing, or one of the major things that I regret, all the way up until I went through my deliverance and was able to release myself from this. But I remember one night when my son Jaden, probably about a year after he was born, I was holding him and I was on the computer, and that was one of the things I used to lose myself in, trying to better my businesses. And I thought I was doing something to, try to provide for my family, but, just the enemy had me just spinning my wheels and nothing was prospering from that. So this one particular night, I'm on the computer and everything, and I was on there for hours, just on the computer, and just thought I was working and researching and stuff like that.
He was there. He was in the house, my husband, but he wasn't present. And he was always working towards trying to make his business or his businesses work, and left me really to hold down everything else in our household.
And I had Jaden in my arms, and never forget, my wife came over to me and she just wanted me to spend time with her. And I just blew up, in front of her. And I remember getting up, and I think I put Jaden down, and I got up, and the next thing I remember, she was on the wall, and I blacked out. And then I remember when I came to myself, the cops were coming in our apartment and I was being arrested. And they asked me, or they asked both of us, who is going downtown? And I didn't want my wife to have to go. I said, I'll go. So that was the first time I was ever arrested. Or no, that wasn't the first time. The first time was, for tickets and stuff like that, non-paying. That's a whole nother story. This time, this was like a time like no other. When I got in the police car, normally it would take about 10 minutes to go to the police station because it was right in New Haven. It seemed like that night it took 2 days to get to the police station. That was the longest ride of my life. And I'll never forget the detective that arrested me. I was in his car, and he kept saying to me, he said, "You're not supposed to be here." He said, "It's just something different about you." He said, "You're not supposed to be here." And I didn't say anything, just agreeing with him, nodding my head. And I just felt so remorseful. And my life just started flashing before my eyes. Like, how did I get here? how did I get to this point? You know, being raised in church, I wasn't concerned about, you know, my name or reputation, anything like that. I didn't care about all of that. You know, I didn't care about my last name, didn't care about who I was and everything. I was just tired of going through what I was going through, but didn't know how to get out of what I was in, because I did not have a true relationship with God. I knew my family's God, my parents' God, but I did not have that relationship for myself. Didn't know how to get out of what I was in. I went to processing and everything, and I stayed in jail, in lockup overnight. The next day I had to go to court and everything. Stood before the judge, and I'll never forget, my wife was there. And he told both of us, he said, if I don't see y'all in here for 90 days, then this case will be nollied. You know, won't be on your record or anything. And that's what happened. Didn't do anything, you know, for 90 days. I remember going home that day, and I said to my wife, I said, did I put my hands on you? Like, did I hit you or anything? And she said no. And I just remember just letting out like a sigh of relief. I don't know what I would have done if I ever hit her. I can never see myself putting my hands on her. And not just for myself, but just from the talks that we've had and how she was raised and the abuse that she suffered, I didn't want her to have to go through that, you know, but not knowing I was emotionally abusing her and didn't even know it. So we tried working on our marriage, you know, after that and everything, but things kept coming up. My past, you know, those demons that I was wrestling with kept coming up. I didn't know how to deal with it. I had such a big issue with the demon of pride. It had to be my way or nobody else's way. I had to be the man of the house, and not even knowing that the roles were already reversed. I remember we used to get into verbal arguments because it didn't go the way I thought it should go. I would go for days without talking to my wife. It should never be like that. Went for days. I would go to bed, not even saying goodnight, not even kissing her, crawling over to my side of the bed and just going to sleep. And some nights she would just be up crying. And I was like, oh, well. You know, that's how much pride that I was dealing with.
I would bring those things up. Prayerfully, I would pray and ask God for the correct timing, but I would bring those issues up where I felt like I had to walk on eggshells when I was around him, because he was very self-centered and not aware of how his behaviors and his actions affected others. So when I would try to point out certain things where he was being, you know, he was operating in pride, he would deny it. He would fly off the handle and get upset. And there were many nights that he went to bed and, you know, I was left crying. And he would go a week, sometimes a little longer, without even speaking to me. So those things came in from his pride and him not being able to see how those things affected his family, affected me, affected his children.
The enemy just had me on an island by myself. Didn't know how to deal with it. Didn't know what it was that I was struggling with, but I knew I had issues. Yes, being a preacher's kid and everything. It was all about me. That's where the pride, you know, the pride was consistent in my marriage at the time. Enemy just had me blinded just with pride, rage, anger, bitterness. rebellion, all of these things that I was dealing with from my teenage years crept into my marriage, and it was strong in my marriage. Didn't know how to break free from this. Didn't know I had an issue. I just thought it was me, my personality. This is who I am. When I look back on it and we talk about it now, other women would have been out. My wife really had that one-on-one relationship with God, even just to stick around. Other women would have been gone, I would say, the second year of us being married, but she stuck it out.
There were many times in our marriage, even though, like I said, he was in the house, he was not present, and I felt alone.
She knew deep down that God was going to change the situation, which he did. Fast forward to 2018, there were a lot of things that led up to this. I had to put out about what was going on with me, or what happened to me as a kid and being molested by my older cousin. And during this time, he was a pastor in my family's church. So again, I prayed about it, and I just felt at this time that this was the right thing to do. I had a number of people that were my so-called friends. So I went live. I'll never forget this day. It was back in November 2018. Friday night, I went live, and the headline for it was molestation in the Pentecostal church. I sat down the night before and told my wife this was something I was going to do. And I just felt it was time, just from everything that was going on, what we were hearing from other people that were still being molested. So I put out the video, and that video went viral. It was like overnight that night. There were so many people that I didn't even know that video was reaching, that was in church, that saw the video and inboxed me and said this video blessed me because I was holding the same secret. But since you were able to muster up the strength to come out with it, I'm going to do the same. You know, I feel that it's time for me to release this as well. So I was able to bless so many people just by putting out what happened to me. So after I got off the call that night, I remember it was like a huge weight that lifted off of me. Once that weight lifted off of me, the next day, I was still getting, that whole weekend, I was getting calls left and right. Then came Sunday, that Sunday, after I put out the video, and my family put out a rebuttal video to that. And that was the last time that I was in contact with my family, cousins, aunts, uncles. Yeah, they stopped talking to me from that Sunday on because of what I did, with me being a victim because of what I did. So the weight that lifted off of me on Friday night after I put out the video, that same weight came back on me on Sunday, because now it's like, oh my gosh, my family is not talking to me because of what I did. So now all of those spirits that I was wrestling with started coming back up. I started getting angry, you know, like how could they, you know, not talk to me? And I was the victim. So there were a number of things that came from me putting out that video. And how I still believe that it was God, that told me to do that, because after that, even though my family stopped talking to me, there were layers of things that were breaking off of me. So then in the next year, 2019, there were things that me and my wife were dealing with. And God allowed for those layers to start peeling from our marriage. We were able to start now talking about things that was going on in our marriage. That was 2019. So in the end of 2020, my cousin started taking his family through deliverance.
At a church that they found in Atlanta, Georgia, by someone that they knew. And this ministry was taking people through deliverance over Zoom and other online means.
So that caught my attention. And I'm like, okay, if they're going through deliverance and, taking their kids through deliverance, I said, I want to go through that. I know I need deliverance. And I knew that from all of the things that God was starting to break off of me and starting to show me through my therapy sessions and stuff like that. So I said, please give me his number. I want to set something up. So I called, and so I set up a Zoom, and I said, I need to go, for myself. So the first time myself and my wife did it together, she was sitting right beside me. That was the best deliverance session ever. It was only 1 hour, but it seemed like it was 4 hours. All of the things that God was delivering me from in 1 hour, it was amazing. I felt so much at peace after that first deliverance session. I said, oh my gosh, I want more of this. Because I started noticing, God started showing me things dropping off of me, more layers being stripped from my childhood, from things that I've been through. And I wanted more of this because of how I was feeling. So the next time we went down was in 2021, in March 2021. And we flew down to Atlanta. It was myself, my wife, and my daughter. That was the first time. And when I tell you the power of God that was in that place, oh my gosh, that Tuesday night. And that's all they do on Tuesday nights is just deliverance. They do deliverance sessions throughout the day, every hour, on the hour. And at 7 o'clock, they have mass deliverance with Tuesday night Bible study. And I've never seen anything like it in my life. And I was hooked. I wanted more of God. And that night also, I'll never forget, there was a pastor there, Pastor Ken. Pastor Ken called myself and my wife up. And for 45 minutes straight, he was just prophesying to both of us, pouring into our ministry. Did not know it at the time that we were going to have a deliverance ministry, but he started pouring into us. And he was talking to my wife, and after probably about 40 minutes, he looked over at my wife and he said, God said, do not be scared of demons. So after he said that to my wife, he looked at me and he said the same thing to me. God said, do not be afraid of demons. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm not confronting no demon. I don't have no reason to be scared of a demon. So, I'm not trying to do anything with demons. So I just put that out of my head. And when we got in the car, me and my wife was like, wow, I wonder why he said that. Not knowing October 21st, 2021, that same year, was about to happen.
Who would have ever thought that I'd be able to see demons face to face?
October 21st, 2021. That was the day that my life changed for the good. In one night, God shifted my old way of thinking and renewed my mind and gave me a kingdom mindset, a kingdom way of thinking. So the beginning of this night started like any other regular night. So one of the other things that I struggled with was drinking. I never knew balance. So that night, October 21st, I had some orange juice and I put some rum in there and mixed it with some wine. And not only that, I just got back from Florida and I picked up some CBD oil. And my wife was at the time dealing with some pain in her limbs and joints and stuff like that. So we were using the CBD oil for that, to put on her joints and her limbs and stuff to relieve her of pain. And the CBD oil had THC in it as well. Clinic where I got that from, they said that was, perfect for what my wife was going through. CBD oil mixed with THC. And they said you can also ingest it. It came with a dropper and stuff like that. So that night, October 21st, 2021, not only did I have the orange juice with the rum in the cup and added some wine, I also took a drop of the CBD oil. So I had all of this that night. Half an hour went by and I could have sworn that I was losing my mind. My mind, it felt like I was on a roller coaster. We used to go to Yonkers Raceway and they used to have in New York at the fair this ride that it was like the Musical Express, that just went around in a circle and it would get faster and faster and faster. And you have on the top, music at the time and you're just going around fast. That's how my mind was going. Like I was sitting down, but it felt like I was walking and I was just like this in the seat in my office, just going back and forth. And I had my eyes open, but it was like I was on that ride. So I stood up and I couldn't even walk straight. I totally felt like I was losing my mind. I never felt that way in my life. It felt like I was going crazy. So one of the things that God had me do, and this is 11:30 at night, my wife went to sleep about 9 o'clock at night. She just took some NyQuil. Anybody that knows anything about NyQuil, once you take that, because she wasn't feeling well, once you take that, it puts you to sleep within like a half an hour, the liquid form. Well, the pills do the same thing. Speaking from a true NyQuil expert, we used to be given NyQuil when we was younger by one of my aunts, and I was like 10 or 11 at the time. And she used to line us up to take NyQuil. I have so many stories. So I knew about NyQuil from an early age. But she took the NyQuil about 9:30 at night, that night. And it was 11:30 and God told me to wake her up. So I go up to our bedroom and I'm sitting at the foot of the bed and I'm tapping her leg. And I said, babe, you gotta wake up. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And I'm crying at this point and everything. So she's trying to wake up and she didn't know what was going on. So like 5 minutes went by. I'm trying to wake her up. I said, I just need you to pray. So she started praying and I said, no, I really need you to pray. And she just started speaking in tongues, started coming against what I was dealing with in the spiritual realm. And so we went downstairs because my daughter was in the room and she was sleeping. She had to get up for school. That was a Thursday night. We go downstairs to my office and she's asking me like, what happened? I told her, I said, I took a drop of CBD oil. So at this point, she gets on the phone with one of her close friends, Sandra. And Sandra gets on the phone and she told her like what I took. And Sandra told her to make up like a concoction, to try to bring me down off of what they thought I was on. So it was a concoction of like lemon juice and some pepper and, stuff like that. Sandra's Caribbean, so she was trying to, I guess, put some all natural herbs and stuff together to bring me down off of what I was on. So my wife gets this big cup, I remember, and I don't remember a lot of things that went on that night. God brought back bits and pieces of stuff, but that's why he had my wife there with me to fill in the blanks for the stuff that I did not remember. So she gets this big blue cup, and I like sour stuff, but she filled it up with lemon juice, put all of this stuff in there, red pepper flakes and all of this other stuff, curry powder and everything. And I just remember just drinking it down. A big glass of, and it was bigger than the red Solo cups. And I drank all of it down. And that's how I knew I wasn't in my right mind. Drinking down lemon juice in one shot like that. I just wanted to get free from that state that I was in. So I was taking whatever it is that my wife was making up for me, not knowing that all of what I was about to go through was spiritual and not natural. So we're in my office and everything, and then God directed us to go outside. I don't know why we went outside, but he directed us to go outside. And that's what this video is showing right here. So we're outside, and don't forget, this is 11:30 at night, and we're outside, and the first thing I would say after about 15 minutes of me being outside, I just needed to get air. I needed to be outside to get air. Now this is October 21st, a Thursday night, and I'm in just shorts, flip-flops, and a tank top, as you can see in the video. So I'm outside walking back and forth for about 15 minutes. And then that's when everything started. After about 15 minutes, I'm off to the left of my house in the front, and God just started showing me demons that were in my bloodline, demons that I was facing, past and present and future. The first demon was a demon of pornography that I saw. And just as this camera is sitting in front of me, that's how close the demon was, the demon of pornography. God showed me that demon of pornography. And after warring in the spirit, I can see that demon. I'm warring, I'm saying scriptures and saying that that demon has no power. God is the greatest power. I'm reading, I'm saying scriptures. God started bringing back to my remembrance all of the scriptures that I once knew, even scriptures that I didn't know. My wife was saying that I was saying. Afterwards, she said, I didn't even think you knew that many scriptures. But God was bringing all of these scriptures to my memory because I was at war with the enemy. So that first demon was a demon of pornography. After I was warring with that demon, I started throwing up. And that's where the deliverance came. I was taking myself through deliverance. So it was the demon of pornography, demon of rebellion, demon of anger, demon of rage. All of these demons that I was dealing with in my past, present, and future, God had me war with them, and they were being cast out that night. So after every demon that I was warring with, I started throwing up. So total that night, honestly, no lie, no joke, I threw up over 30 times out there that night. You can't tell me that spiritual warfare is not real. God allowed me to see it that night. So this just brought another level of trusting God, even to my wife, because even though she was there right by my side, she could not see the demons that I was wrestling with. She just heard me speaking back and forth at them. And I kept calling the demons. I said, you punk, look at you. You know, what are you doing? And God created such a boldness in me that night. I was not afraid. And after that, that's why God brought that to myself and my wife's remembrance. That's why Pastor Ken, when we went down to Atlanta for deliverance, he told both of us, do not be afraid of demons for this night. That was in March that we went down there. This happened in October of the same year. That is why. So after I took myself through deliverance, God had me taking my kids through deliverance. Now, mind you, my kids weren't out there. They were not out there. It was just myself and my wife. But God showed me the demons that they would wrestle with. So I had to cast out all of those demons. Even with their demons, even though they weren't out there, still after I was warring with the demons that they were dealing with, I started throwing up again. Started casting them out, throwing up. Now I'm out there, and at one point I'm prostrate on the ground. And we had some weeds out there in the walkway where I was laying. And at one point, God just had me pulling up literally the weeds and said, I was saying, I uproot by the power of God all of these strongholds that my kids would have to deal with. They are not going to deal with this. I come against the spirit of everything that God was showing me for each one of my kids. I was pulling up the roots, literally pulling up the roots out there that night. So I went through all of my kids, taking them through deliverance and, warring with the demons that they would be wrestling with. And after that, God just had me start proclaiming over my house. I was saying proclamations. I declare that we shall not be the tail, but we shall be the head. I started proclaiming over my life as the head of my house. The roles now were starting to be shifted again. Everything was coming back into proper alignment as God had it, as God saw fit. All in one night. Started doing that. Then I thought I was done. Then God started showing me my family members and went down the line, with my aunts, showing me the demons that they would be wrestling with, demons of cancer, demons of rebellion, demons of anger, demons of rage, demons of pride, different things. And I'm warring with this. And when I got to one aunt in particular, the demon looked back at me. He was leaving, going back to where he came from. It was his fire. It was a pit. And he was going back, but he turned around and looked at me and said, "Why are you standing in the gap for them? They don't even talk to you." I said, "I don't care if they don't talk to me. I'm warring against their demons, and you have to leave. You have to go." And he just disappeared. Spiritual warfare is no joke. And I was not afraid that night. God created such a boldness in me and my wife. Even though she couldn't see what was going on, she was still praying in the spirit. And at one point, I was on the ground laying prostrate, and two demons came over and started trying to muzzle my mouth. So I couldn't even talk. So even though she couldn't see what was going on, I'm on the ground and I'm just mumbling. I'm like, And I was doing this. To her. And she knew that meant to start speaking in tongues. I was under attack, more of an attack. And I was like this, laying on the ground. And she just started warring in the spirit. And the more that she warred in the spirit, they started releasing their hands off of my mouth. And I'm still just laying on the ground. And it was like they had me pinned down to the ground. But the more that I was doing this, and the more she started speaking in tongues, the more that they had to back up. And that's how you know that spiritual warfare is so real. Even the tongues, the heavenly tongues that we speak in, that is real also, because the demons, they have to flee. They have to flee. And I'm just getting chills just even thinking about that night. They have to flee. So I slowly start getting up. And this was after I'm pulling up the roots and all of that. Slowly start getting up. And God just had me see the order of the demonic realm. So these were little, I would say, imps that were coming up to attack me. Little demons. And they were reporting to a bigger demon that was in the back. And come to find out, that was a demon of murder that they were reporting to. And after every demon that I cast out, like I said, I was throwing up. They fled, went back down into the pit, and that demon was still there. So I started going against that spirit of murder, but it seemed like it would not leave. And that was like towards the end of me being outside. And that spirit of murder was still there. And then it just disappeared. After I got through my cousins and, God started showing me the demons that they were wrestling with and stuff. Once I got through all of that, that main demon disappeared. So I went inside and I just felt like in my spirit that was it. So I slowly started coming to my right mind. once we got inside, but I kept telling my wife, I said, do not let me get up, because she was laying with me on the couch in my office, and I just kept feeling something. I knew everything wasn't gone. All of those demons, I just kept feeling something was still there. So we went upstairs and she said, okay, well, you have to get in the shower. And she undressed me. I was still coming to my right mind. And I get in the shower and I look down, and all of the dirt that was in there, I'm like, oh my gosh. I said, where did all of this come from? She said, from when you was outside. I did not know I was in all of the dirt that was outside. I was laying in my throw up, being out there and everything. I had no recollection of that. I didn't know what happened. And then God started bringing different things back to my remembrance. After I get out the shower, I lay down and I told my wife again, I said, please, babe, don't let me get up. Don't let me get up. Because one of the things, and I didn't tell my wife that night, but the enemy was telling me to go get my gun. And I didn't know what he wanted me to do with my gun. So that's why I kept telling my wife, do not let me get up. So next day came, that was Friday, and God started bringing more things to my remembrance. And that Tuesday, that coming Tuesday, I already had a session set up, a deliverance session set up with the Atlanta pastor already. So I couldn't wait to, tell him what happened and tell him my encounter, my transformation, what happened to me. So Tuesday came and everything. And between Friday and Tuesday, God started bringing more things back to my remembrance. So I told him what happened, told him, a brief, I would say, testimony of what happened to me on that Thursday. And he said, I want to, just deal with that spirit of murder. So he began to call up that spirit of murder, and come to find out, there was early in my ancestors, I don't know, this was back in 1932, but there was a sacrifice that was done in my family, and that's how that spirit of murder came into my bloodline. And that's why that spirit of murder would not leave on that Thursday during my transformation. So he had me renounce that. And before that spirit left for good, he said, why did you tell Greg to get his gun? He said, because I wanted him to get his gun so he can take his life. I thought it was to do something to my family. I thought that spirit or that demon wanted me to take out my family, but he wanted me to kill myself. And Pastor Donnie said to that demon, why? Why did you want him to kill himself? He said, because of the work that him and his wife are about to do, I wanted to stop him, because he's about to tear down our kingdom. And oh my gosh, after that, demon was cast out, after I renounced that spirit of murder from being in my bloodline, me and my wife started talking about that. It just took me to another level of boldness, just because I was ready for what God had for us to encounter. I'm like, it can't be worse than what I experienced during my transformation. I'm ready, So Pastor Donnie just told us, he said, I'm so proud of you and your wife. He said, just from this and from what God is showing me, You guys are going to have an awesome ministry tearing down the enemy's kingdom. And no joke, no lie, ever since then, God has been dealing with me strongly in the prophetic. So just look at how now that was one of the things that the enemy was able to suppress, me prophesying. And he suppressed it by me being molested. That was the door that opened up all of the suppression for the gifts that God was trying to work in me. And I never prophesied after I went through my deliverance, my transformation deliverance, my self-deliverance. Then the floodgates of the gifts started flowing again, because now I renounced all of those things. I was delivered from all of those spirits that I was dealing with. Now those gifts started welling up again. Prophecy was the first one, and God has been using both myself and my wife ever since. That was another thing that God said was, you two are going to be a team. That's why I had you wake her up, because y'all are going to be a team in tearing down the enemy's kingdom together. So everywhere we go, when we minister, it's her and I. We're locking hands. The Bible says, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there will I be in the midst also. And it's been like that ever since October 21, 2021. God has been using us to tear down the enemy's kingdom, breaking strongholds that people are dealing with, setting people free. God has been putting people in our path to set free. And these are the unchurched.
So what did the Lord do for you today?
He blessed me so much by your ministry. That pain been in my back for 3 years, and it was constant, and it never left. I couldn't even stand up for a long time, and now I don't feel no pain in my back. No pain. I don't feel no pain.
Thank you, Lord.
And your husband prayed for me, and he commanded that spirit to leave of infirmity. And I kept on hearing it's an infirmity, it's an infirmity. And he called out, it was several, but he called it out, and he didn't stop until that pain left.
Thank you, Lord. Praise God. Thank you for your
Amen.
testimony.
It's a miracle.
Thank you, Jesus.
Yes, yes.
Out, all the way and out. Yes, God. Out from her soul. Up and up, out, all the way out. Witchcraft. In the name of Jesus. Yep. I knew you were there. I knew you were there.
Chloe, in the name of Jesus. No.
Not you.
Yes, holy. That's the Holy Spirit. Pushing out all of that. We just send right now the Holy Spirit, even to all of those other demons that are still there, just to push them out. We send the love of God right now. Go. Rukushaka Tarlabase.
You will not torment her. In the name of Jesus.
It's all right. It's okay. It's all right. Rukusaka. Rokosika Tarlabase Kedaraboso. Rukusaka Tarlabase. Every altar of rejection, I burn you down right now in the name of Jesus.
24 hours when I spoke to you the first time?
I got better. I got better, and my insurance paid.
And how long they were saying when you were in the hospital that you didn't have any insurance?
I had to wait a whole year. Before I had to wait till 65. But the devil took me somewhere that I didn't want to be. But God brought me back where I need. He's a good God. Good God.
And within 24 hours, that was one of the words that God had me say to you, that within 24 hours, your situation is going to turn around.
That's right, and it did.
And what happened?
They told me it's going to take me three weeks. And you told me something different. I didn't believe them. I believe our God.
That's right. Not people that have grown up in church, but people that are sick of church because of what they see and what they hear and leaders playing around. These are the people that God is using us to set free and have a word for. And I just thank God for what he's doing. This is not the end. There's so much more that I didn't even share, but this is just a brief testimony of what God has done for me. My transformation. I will never be the same. And I'm not going backwards. After what God showed me on October 21st, I would be a fool to go backwards.
So after his encounter, the transformation, the encounter, whatever you want to call it, that happened that night would forever change not only Greg's life, but mine, our children, our grandchildren, generations to come. And so what happened was I wasn't feeling well that night, and I took NyQuil and went to bed, and it must have been around 9 at night. And then at around 11:30, Greg came upstairs and he was telling me to pray for him, to pray. He needed me. He woke me up, and I was groggy because you know what NyQuil does to you. And I was trying to get it all together, and so I began praying for him. And then he kept telling me to pray for his head and that he felt like he was losing his mind. And so I began to pray. And then my first thing was let's move from the bedroom because our daughter was sleeping. And then all of the kids, the young adults upstairs, I didn't want it to affect their sleep. And because he was, crying and saying that he was losing his mind and he needed me to pray. So I, you always need someone to, kind of reinforce what you're going through, because it was shocking how he was. It was really like he was losing his mind. And so I called one of my friends on the phone and we began to pray together, and she was giving me some advice on what I should give him. And we went out. He kept walking outside, and it was October and it was cold. So I was walking with him outside and praying in the spirit. And every time I would begin to, and he was going after, he was speaking directly to spirits, and I could not see those spirits. So I honestly thought he was losing his mind. And I was praying at the same time. I'm praying for him, but I'm telling God, I'm like, I can't live the rest of my life with him like this. So something has to happen. I can't, have him. I can't live with Rain Man for the rest of my life. So God, I need you to intercede, and I need you to do something because I did not understand what was happening, what was going on with him. And I was praying, and there was many pieces that were missing. He didn't tell me everything that had happened that night. I came to find out everything that happened. But while I was praying and interceding, I didn't understand what was happening. And he was going up against generational curses, not only for himself, but our children and family members. And we were out there for almost 2.5 hours in warfare. And he could see the demons, literally see the demons. I couldn't. So to me, it was like he was just yelling and fussing at, the air. And spiritually, I know that there was, he was going against demons, but we had never experienced that. So that was shocking. It was scary. And I didn't have fear. I just was, how is this going to turn around? Like, how is this going to end? Because it seemed never ending. After that night, after that encounter, after his transformation, it really was night and day in our marriage. The tables totally reversed, where I was the head and had to do everything and had to hold down everything spiritually as well as naturally. Greg began to not only operate in his gifts and his callings, but he took the headship. And one thing that I would like to say, this world has counterfeited what God's plan is for marriage and made it seem like women want to be in control and they want to be the head and they want to, control everything that's going on. And it's absolutely, and they need to be independent and they have to, of their husband, of many things, just that independence. So I'm an independent woman. And from my perspective and having to hold everything down for 20 years, when Greg went through his transformation, it was a breath of fresh air, because finally in my life, I felt like I could rely on my husband. I did not have to hold everything up. I didn't have to carry everything on my shoulders. So I was grateful to God that I could finally depend on my husband and that he could be the head and that he was hearing from God and he was leading us as Christ leads him.
And let me just say this before I finish. Everything that I said in this video, I was being transparent, even down to my family. And the only reason God is able to even use me to be able to use my wife is because first you have to admit that there's a problem. And that's what I was able to do. I was able to admit, yes, I need help. Yes, I struggle with this. I struggle with pride. I struggle with drinking. I struggle with this. Yes, I'm in the church, born and raised as a preacher's kid, but we all have issues. And God can only help and set us free and deliver us when we're honest with ourselves. He's not going to push past your will. You can say to your blue in the face, yes, I want to be, I want to be used. I want to be this. I want to be that. But if you're not going to admit where you're at, God is not going to push past your will. So that's all you have to do. Just admit that there's an issue. Admit that there's a problem. Admit that you struggle with different things. And it's not going to, a man, but it's going to God. Say, God, you see what I struggle with. Yes, I struggle with pride. Yes, I struggle with pornography. Yes, I struggle with rebellion. Yes, I struggle with adultery. Whatever it is, God is just waiting for you to admit that there's an issue. Admit that there's a problem so he can work. That's what he did with me, and I'm the better for it. Thank you for watching my testimony.